Hello and welcome to the third installment in this CBT series entitled CBT Core Beliefs. If you've watched so far, you will have seen the first two videos. The first one looked at what CBT is, and the second one, the last video that went out, looked at cognitive distortions. What are they and why are they important? And thank you for following along with those. In this video, we're going to look at something which is, in essence, the quintessential area that CBT looks at addressing. So when someone has gone through a lot of therapy, ideally, the area of what we call core belief has been explored to identify what these are and to understand them as to how they impact how we experience our world today. Okay? So core beliefs, to start with, I think it's really important to mention this at the outset. Our core beliefs can be quite confronting when we look at them. And so this is why it's important that any work that's done around core beliefs is really done with someone qualified to look at them with you. Okay? Core beliefs are essentially that. They are the beliefs we hold at our core. And very, very often, and for the purpose of this video, because we're obviously talking about something that is used therapeutically, a lot of these core beliefs that we're going to talk about tend to be negative. And the thing about negative core beliefs is that it's not our fault that we hold them. It's not our fault that we have a certain core belief. And why is that? Very simply because the core beliefs that you and I hold about ourselves, and we later on go to show you the three categories, the three domains in which core beliefs lie. But the core beliefs we hold, let's say, about ourselves, are core beliefs that we didn't critically work out and think and say, oh, that's the belief I hold about myself. They're core beliefs we picked up, as many things, back in the past, as vulnerable children, when we were growing up. They're from the environments we grew up in, the messages we received. And it's important to take a moment to acknowledge that for now. So core beliefs tend to be very definitive and defining, and they're also very restrictive. Because while we pick them up in the past, they affect us in the day, and they affect us into our future. So understanding core beliefs and identifying them, it's very important to be compassionate to ourselves and understand that these core beliefs, you didn't choose them, okay? But we interpreted and picked those messages out for our environment. So very, very simply, although we don't have the time, and I might do a video in the future about this, the way in which children identify their environment through their interactions with it. But very, 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 very quickly, children take messages from their environment, be it from a shouting adult, be it from an experience they've had that's quite frightening, whatever number of things that have happened. They don't take that message and go, oh, well, is it true or is it not? Or is it really dangerous or is it not? They think in very literal ways. They have to. They don't question the messages they receive. So therefore, to be simplistic about it, a child who's, let's say, grown up with a lot of abuse and neglect might believe as a core belief, other people are dangerous, or the world is a dangerous place. There's an example of a core belief, okay? So what I'm just going to talk about firstly is that core beliefs sit in three broad settings, okay? So the core beliefs that you and I hold relate to three different domains, we shall say. The first, and I'm going to give examples, I'm going to give you three examples for each domain. Now, there can be many, many, many other types of core belief. There's lots of different types of core belief. For the purpose of this video, we're just going to look, I'll mention a few of them, then we'll use one as an example, and I'll show you how they operate. So in terms of the self, a person can have the sort of core belief that I am unlovable. I am a bad person. I'm not worthy. They would be examples of core belief messages and narratives that run on in people's heads. And in fact, it's often said that when someone says in therapy, I am, and then they put a word after it, a fairly thinking therapist will often chase that down to try to identify, are they saying something that is just a fleeting statement, or are they saying something that's at a deeper level true for them? Do they actually believe that they're unlovable? Do they actually believe that they're a bad person? Do they actually believe they're not worthy? Because if they do, then that is something we need to look to, because that is explaining a lot of what their current difficulties may be coming from. The second type of core belief or domain is core beliefs about other people. So we don't just have them about ourselves. We hold core beliefs about others as well. Some of the core beliefs people can hold about others are things like people can't be trusted. People are judgmental. People only care about themselves. Okay? So you think about that, that's a core belief attributable to others, not ourselves, but to other people. But it would be naive to say that core belief of other people doesn't affect how we interact with them, because it very fundamentally does. And the last domain is core beliefs about our world, the world around us. Okay. So, for example, and it's not hard to imagine for someone who's had a very difficult start in their lives, from a lot of adversity, people can believe, examples of core beliefs can be, the world is dangerous. Nothing goes right. Threats are everywhere. So again, these core beliefs, the first one relating to core beliefs about ourselves, the second about core beliefs about others, and the third one about core beliefs about our world, are really, really strong as they're picked up early and they play out in our day-to-day lives. And a really clever way of describing them is the pair of shades example or analogy. So remember I said a few moments ago that these core beliefs come from our past and our early experience. They don't just come from there. In actual fact, CBT offers us a great understanding as to how we get core beliefs later on. However, mainly speaking, they do come from early experience. So if you think about it, if you've had an early experience where your view is the world is dangerous, well then when you go into new situations, you go in with that bias that something might go wrong, okay? Something might not be quite right. So in other words, you have the pair of shades on. Whether it's a core belief about what you are as a person, who you are, who others are, or what the world is like, when you go into a new situation, and I say new because the core belief doesn't really allow anything to be a new situation, because while the situation may be something you haven't gone into exactly the same way before, the trouble is you're going in with the same thinking patterns alive and well. So the shades represent the fact when you go into anything new or have an experience with someone else, regrettably, you're seeing it through your core belief. You're not seeing it exactly for what it is, but you're seeing it through the lens of core belief. And the core beliefs then determine how you experience that situation. So what keeps the core beliefs alive and well? Well, two things: rules and assumptions. So the core beliefs we have from a very young age, okay, as we grow, we don't necessarily know we have those core beliefs, but what we do know, or what we might be aware of, is there's ways in which we manage our interactions with maybe other people. And this way of managing our interactions is a way of coping with the core belief. So let me give you an example, okay? Let's say your core belief happens to be that people are judgmental, okay? Okay, so if that's your core belief, then you will have a rule to cope with that. And that rule might be, I must always do everything to keep myself safe around others. So I must keep myself safe around others, essentially. And it's interesting, the words I must, I should, I have to, I ought to, they are all an example of an individual's rule for themselves relating to their core belief. So I must always keep myself safe around others. Okay, that's a rule. But now there's an assumption that goes with that rule in a kind of a way to protect it. Because if that's the rule, then what's going to happen when that experience happens to play out for you and you find yourself with other people? So a person who feels like that might make an assumption that if I say the wrong thing, then people will think I'm stupid. Okay? If I say the wrong thing, people will think I'm stupid. There are many people, many people who would have that assumption about something and that rule about something. And the thing about the rule is something strict, right? It must be followed. It's not something the person's always aware of, but in CBT, we actually we put a lot of effort into uncovering a person's rule book, as I call it. What's your rule book for life? What are the rules? And what's the assumption? And when the assumptions are best captured by if-then statements. If I find myself uncomfortable, then I must leave. If I am liked by if I please everybody, then people will like me. These are assumptions people make. And they're coming out of a core belief. Let's take the social example. So people are judging me in a social situation. The person might then have the assumption, if I am if I say the wrong thing, people will judge me, and they'll think I'm stupid. So what might people do around that? Well, if you feel that uncomfortable, then what that tends to drive is avoidance behavior. You'll not go out. You'll avoid stepping out. I don't do anything that seems too difficult for me. Okay, well, if that's what you decide to do, well, then there'll be many opportunities in life you will miss out on because you've decided that already that if it's too difficult, you don't try it. And that could speak to a core belief of being incompetent. Again, we're just kind of mentioning them here in a very casual way. But it's important to understand that these core beliefs play out, just like these glasses. They prevent me or you, if we don't challenge them, they prevent us having a neutral experience of a situation. It always is contaminated through the lens of the belief we hold. And if we feel other people are judgmental, we would be reluctant and careful around other people, which means we might avoid other people, which means we tend to isolate more. If we believe the world is dangerous, then we might try to make sure we do everything to keep ourselves safe. And that might mean we limit our interactions. If we feel that we are not a worthy person, well, then we may turn down opportunities that come our way because we feel we're not deserving of them. And the examples can go on and on and on. So you might ask, well, if core beliefs are so important, which they are, what do we try to do about them? Well, in therapy, we try to do, bluntly, one of two things with those core beliefs. So let me just get the glasses for a second. Through the process of actually looking at core beliefs, the idea is we start to take a core belief like, I am unlovable. Let's imagine that one. And the therapist and client start to look at that and unpack it. And in a minute, I'll tell you the way they get to look at that. But again, I would stress it's a really important thing to do with someone, with a therapist, not alone. Okay? But the idea is you start to question the core belief so that for just a small amount of time, the perspective changes to this sort of situation where you still have your core belief, but you're beginning to get a little bit of sight as that maybe this core belief, maybe that's not true for me. I'm incompetent? Really? I do believe I'm incompetent, but how does that stack up with having completed this and that and the other? In other words, the person starts to question that core belief. So questioning and critically challenging a core belief is a really important thing. And as that goes on, what tends to happen is a person starts to believe that core belief less. Now, that does not mean they are cured or better from their anxieties or depressions or whatever it happens to be. It doesn't mean that. But what it does mean is that now there's some more perspective coming in. Now they're aware that in actual fact, when I'm in an uncomfortable situation, these core beliefs get actuated in me. They get activated. And I start thinking certain ways and feeling certain ways. And actually all it is, forgive the example, but all it is my core belief's been activated. So you begin to see what's actually going on here. rather than taking what's going on as an example of your deficits or you not being competent. You're seeing that, it's like the inner critic is coming up now. The internal voice that says you're no good is coming up, but you're able to see it for what it is, rather than going, oh yes, you're right. Of course I'm no good. Of course you're no good. You're not worthy of anything. It's like, well, now hold on. I'm going to start looking at you. Okay? So the idea is that over time, by challenging the core beliefs that the person holds, and by looking at them, they begin to believe them less, just like where the glasses are now on me. I'm biased by certain things that come in, but I can also see another perspective. Or ultimately, get rid of it. In other words, change the core belief for a more helpful, more beneficial, and actually more rational and reasonable and realistic belief about yourself, which doesn't have that past content in it. So remember, as I said in the beginning, core beliefs, they are not your fault. The difficulty with them is they are what create problems in the now, and they are what create problems into the future, because they are the way in which you see your world. And the trouble with that then is it's not only the way you experience your world is the way you're going to think in your world. The way you're going to think in your world is the way you're going to feel in your world. And guess what? The way you feel in the world is going to affect what you do in the world. So when you start engaging in actions, we then often suffer the consequences of those actions, often because we feel threatened or there's something that's gone on and we feel vulnerable. The difficulty is there's a consequence past the action. So in CBT, while a lot of the work begins with, you might remember we spoke about in the beginning, looking at automatic thoughts and cognitive distortion and automatic thinking and all of that. That's all really interesting stuff. But the purpose of it ultimately is to get down to the deeper level. And the deeper level, the place, as they say, where it's at in CBT, is down to the core beliefs. The core beliefs are like the unconscious to a psychoanalyst. It's like the electron to the physicist, okay? The word to the author. Okay? They are the quintessential place, the source of all the trouble, you could say. They're the source of all the trouble that, when explored and identified, can really help us grow personally and professionally. Now, how are they looked at? Well, very, very often, and if you're watching this, having been through any sort of therapy that involves a cognitive behavioral component, you will have been aware of challenging your thinking, perhaps using worksheets. So you take a thought and you look for the evidence for, and you look for the evidence against it. And then, it's interesting to see how you feel when you actually do that. And then you find a more realistic thought. That's very helpful for working on thoughts, but it doesn't get necessarily right down to the root of where the problem is, but it's a good entry into it. Okay. The idea is, and this approach is used with a therapist. Okay. So I would really, really urge anyone who would think of exploring this to not do it on your own. But the idea is through Socratic questioning and a technique known as the downward arrow technique, which is an aspect of Socratic questioning. And Socratic questioning is questioning that looks to explore what something actually means for the person. Not what it means for Mary, Paul, or John, but what does it mean for you? Okay, so that we can uncover it, okay, and then identify, well, what does that actually mean? And what does that mean if that's true? And then if that were true, well, what would that mean? So that we can ultimately find out what's at the basis of this for somebody. What's their core belief? So I hope that hasn't been too confusing. And I hope it's given you an idea of why they are important. So just to, I suppose, summarize in a way, it's important to understand them because they are the things we believe. When they get activated in a situation, they create an onslaught of thinking, which creates an onslaught of feeling, which creates an equal onslaught of action. Okay? And until they get changed, patterns tend to repeat themselves because people will always go to the place that they believe about themselves, irrespective of whether it's true or not. So a core belief, let's say, when I gave that example of a young child, if they get a core belief that, let's say, let's say they've grown up in a family and their parents broke up very, very early. Okay? So they might have the belief about relationships. Relationships don't last. Okay? Because they picked it up as a child, they saw. Now, as they grow, they will have lots of other exposures to their friends, parents, to lots of other people. And they will also see relationships like friendships come and go. The difficulty is, because their core beliefs about relationships is so strong and picked up from such a very visceral experience, they will always, every time, every day ending in Y, unfortunately, that person will always tend to be biased to take the information from new situations that support their own belief. So let me explain what I mean by that. What I mean by that is, let's say they have a number of friends in school and their parents are breaking up. Well, what happens? They go, you see, I'm right, relationships don't last. Relationships don't last. Relationships are scary as well, or whatever it happens to be, but they will take that. Equally, there will be lots of relationships that aren't ending and that are still fine. And they will actually know many that are. But what will they believe? No. Relationships don't really last. They go. Not because there's any facts behind that necessarily, but there's the experiential lived experience, the lived learning they have said is that, look, relationships don't last. The difficulty is that core belief narrows their perspective into seeing other things. So you will always see things that support the core belief. So in other words, over the years, there's a drip, drip, drip effect into your core belief so that you believe it in lots of different scenarios. Okay? If you believe the world is full of threat and danger, well then COVID is just another thing that we get frightened about. Okay? Even if the evidence says the world has never been a safer place. Although you could argue that in recent times, but it would also be argued that there's a lot of safety in terms of growing up as a child now in Ireland. You're probably the safest you've ever been. But that won't matter, and that won't play out in terms of if your core belief is the world is full of danger, or people are threatening, or you cannot trust others, or I am unworthy. Those beliefs are very strong. And in many ways, this can be the tragedy of not looking at them. Not because they can't be changed, because they actually can be changed. They can certainly be looked at. And even if they don't get changed, they can be challenged to the point that they're believed less, which is a really good thing, right? Because if you believe something less, you can then at least, when you're in a situation, not go to the extreme side of your reasoning. It might be the very thing because you believe, let's say you had the belief that you're incompetent, but now you've challenged that core belief. Maybe due to some courses you've actually successfully completed. Well, now the difference of being able, now having challenged that, the difference is you will possibly act in a way that will take on another course. And thereby each time you get ahead on something, or you've completed the next yoga module or whatever it happens to be, that's evidence that helps challenge that core belief about yourself. You start to feel a little bit different. Why? Because you're starting to think more critically about that core belief. So in an ideal world, what do we hope? We hope that negative core beliefs get changed into more positive core beliefs. This is not to be confused, may I stress, with negative and positive thinking in the sense of thinking positively, because oftentimes thinking positively isn't always thinking in a healthy way. Okay? CBT is not about having positive thoughts. It's about having realistic interpretations of your environment and more healthy and adaptive thought processes. So those core beliefs, they're the anchor. They're the thing we try to get into, and they can be very resistant, as you can imagine, to change. Very, very resistant. These cognitive distortions were laid down early, and then through our life experience, the data was picked up in our environment that supported the belief in it. So think about that. When someone gets into their 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s, if they've never sat with themselves and looked back there, well, the patterns will continue. Because A, they don't know what the core beliefs probably are, but are also probably affected by letting those core beliefs live, as I say to my clients, living rent-free with internet and everything provided in your brain. If your core belief is going to live there, well, make it work for it. You know, make it own itself. Make it justify why it should be there. Don't just accept what it is. Identify it and work with it. And be gentle with yourself. Because the thing about these beliefs is that they are picked up from early experience. And sometimes that's traumatic experience. Sometimes that's complex traumatic experiences. Sometimes it's experiences that happen to you in your primary school ages, secondary school ages, where perhaps you had a very solid family background, but situations like bullying and those things. So interestingly, a core belief, while most of them are acquired when you're young, we can pick them up later on to some degree if we have enough consistent exposure to things that are challenges. Okay? And if we're not able to deal with those things, we can sort of develop not the most healthy core beliefs vis-a-vis certain situations. So I want to thank you for listening to me on these. The next video that probably come up will be on different topics, but relating to mental health. We'll be looking at diagnosis in the next video, but I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any interest in me covering a particular topic that you would like covered, and assuming it's within my area of qualification, please feel free to drop me an email. As always, it's johngpwills@gmail.com. Thank you for listening and take care.